Hello, my name is Lucas Elliott. I am a Master's of Science in Data Science student at Indiana University. This project was completed as part of the Network Science class that was in May 2020. In this project, we look at using search data from Google Trends and mapping that out as a network using the Gephi visualization tool. The idea here is that we can understand mental associations of how populations might be thinking of different words and how they might be associated with each other in their searches. So Google Trends is the tool we use for this. Google Trends is fairly commonly used, but not necessarily fully utilized for all of its capabilities. This is kind of the overview screen of what you see when you go into Google Trends and type in a word. In this example, we're looking at the Coca-Cola topic, and we can see the popularity over time of searches for that topic in the United States. One particular area of work that has been done is understanding just how Google Trends applies across different industries and how the data itself can be used in terms of forecasting, as well as if it tells us what things look like today or what they could look in the future. But there hasn't really seemed to be a lot of work that's done in understanding related queries and how people are searching for other things in the moment, that they're looking for some other core, and then particularly how that information could be mapped out in terms of a network. So this is where it seems that there's potentially a lot of new opportunity, and that's where this project focuses. But what's cool about Google Trends is there's also this idea of something called related queries, which you can see the definition just exported from Google Trends there. What this shows us is what are the other terms that people were looking for in the moment that they were looking for items related to your route, or in our example, the Coca-Cola topic. The interesting thing about this is that it will give you an index popularity. So the way to think about this is Coke is the most popular term, and then Coca-Cola is about 75% as popular when you think about associated queries that are happening for the Coca-Cola topic. The great thing about this data is it can be exported into a table, but a lot of people don't necessarily understand how to use that. And one of the interesting thing is you can not necessarily directly associate that with comparing different routes. So what this project does is use a graphic in the form of a network visualization to be able to understand those associations. So one thing you might notice about looking at this related queries index popularity number is that could actually work as an edge weight when we're thinking about network visualizations, and that's what we did in this approach. So in order to get that data from the related query screen into a format that's usable by Gephi for a network visualization, we had to do some cleanup. And you also think about, since our goal here is to find associations, we might need to make that a little bit cleaner to make it work correctly. So a good example to illustrate this is if we think about Coca-Cola as a root and Dr. Pepper, both of them have the word diet plus the root as part of their associated queries. If we remove the root word, suddenly we can see, okay, diet is now common to both of these root words. So if we're creating a network visualization, they can both link up on the diet word. Of course, they'll have different importances for each of the brands based on that word. So for example, Diet Coke scores higher in terms of the relative popularity for overall related queries for Coke than it does Diet Dr. Pepper does for Dr. Pepper. So here's a visualization that's created just based on that approach. And so you'll notice here when the edge weights are assigned, so the thicknesses are reflecting the importance of different terms to the related queries for the roots. Since this visual is the node size and the node label size are driven by the degree, of course we're going to see our root words the largest, and that's kind of all we can see. We can see a little bit of other information, but it's a little bit difficult to read this. Using the betweenness centrality is pretty much the same as the degree, and if you think about the functionality, that makes sense. But when we start to think about another option, which is closeness centrality, now you can see something quite interesting, because now those related words that are important to multiple brands are really highlighted. So in this example, of course, we can see can is linked to all 5 of our root words. Diet is linked to 4, but it's really popping out of our visual. And so that's where we can start to navigate this network a bit more effectively. So in this example, we can also zoom into different parts of the network to find associations for brand versus brand. So Pepsi versus Coke, of course, two really commonly compared behemoths in the beverage industry. So we can see here that cola stock jobs, careers are important to both. In the example of cola, both of those have a really thick weight for both Pepsi and Coke. So we can see not only is that a shared term, but it's a shared term with heavy importance to both. And the nice thing about this visualization is it allows us to quickly identify that. Here's another example of looking at Mountain Dew, Dr. Pepper, and Sprite, the other part of our network. So in this example, of course, we can see that commercial is quite important, caffeine and caffeine in. The interesting thing about terms is because of the way that they're exported, different variations of the term are going to be treated as different items or nodes in our network. So in this example, caffeine and caffeine in are both separate associated queries that showed up for the roots, and so they're separated out. We'll talk about that a bit more later, about some opportunities we might be able to do to combine that to be able to find some insights a little bit more easily. So back to our overview, looking at closest centrality, we can kind of just quickly take a look at the center of our network and find what are these most important words to everything. So as we already kind of discussed, can, of course, is central to all 5. Diet, there's 4 of our different brands linking into that, same for commercial. So it allows you to quickly find these associations, but for example, diet is really important to Coke, less so for some of the other brands, and so we can quickly find that association. One interesting thing about Google Trends is that they've got this example of topics versus terms. So those last examples we were looking at, our root was a topic. So the way that you can kind of explain this, I think, is this example they have here from Google Trends Help Center. It makes a lot of sense. If you search for the topic London, so London is our topic in this example. If someone's looking for capital of the UK, Google's technology will say, okay, I know that they were clicking on results related to London, so that's going to be considered the London topic. Or if they look at it in different languages, and that's considered the London topic. Whereas terms, someone has to explicitly look for that word. Now the interesting thing is we could actually compare these and see if we get different data, and that's what we do in a second here. So terms, one thing that, since they are different, so you can see comparing the Coca-Cola topic on the top left with the 3 different types of terms, one thing you can do is you can also combine multiple terms, which is what you're seeing on the green circle here. So that's looking at different spelling variations or different ways that people might call it. And so what you see on the right here is for those 5 core brands, these are the term groupings that we used for this. So now we can do the same thing comparing closest centrality, and it's interesting, you start to see some differences as well as commonalities to what we were seeing before, but we also see some stuff popping out that might have been harder to find before, like calories and sugar. As an example, the word new are all coming out that we might not have seen by just using topics. We can also do direct comparisons. So this is an example of looking at different, just two different brands, looking at the different root queries for them. It's the exact same type of information we might have had in our overall visual, but when we clean everything else out, it might just make it a little bit more easy to identify. That's a technique that we can use pretty simply just by cleaning up the data set that's being utilized before uploading Gephi. Some other benefits of this approach is, of course, we focused on this pretty much just look at commonalities between terms and topics, but the nice thing is, too, we can see what's sort of isolated to individual brands. So Sprite, you can see quickly, cranberry is really important to this. So they've got, of course, a cranberry flavor, and you can see that that's unique just to them. And so that's kind of the great thing about this approach, too, is you can not only see the commonalities, you can also see what's unique to each brand if you're thinking about ownable spaces for a brand versus another. We talked about topics and terms as the input for driving the analysis, and everything in related queries is using terms as the output, but you can also use topics as the output as well, using another data point called related topics. It's interesting, I don't know why they don't just refer to this as related terms, but it is separate. What's interesting is when you start to do related topics for Coke and Pepsi, we can start to see some new things coming out. So for example, caffeine and sugar are both coming up as associations for those 2 brands where we might not have seen them before. So that's an example of some information in the future we might want to look at. Some other great things about Google Trends, that there's a ton of capability in the tool, so we could look at different time ranges, we could look at different locations. They even have this thing called categories, so everything up until now was just looking like all categories, but there is, for example, a food and beverage category, so maybe you want to make sure you're not getting data polluted by people looking for Coca-Cola clothing, for example. And you want them to just look at things related to the product. You could specifically look at that category and potentially identify that. You could compare Coca-Cola in the United States versus Coca-Cola in the United Kingdom. You could compare Coca-Cola for one year versus another and see what sort of associations there are. There are a lot of potential applications here. So hopefully this made sense to everybody who watches this presentation. There is an associated research paper as well if you're interested in that. And hopefully you find this valuable information that you might be able to apply in your own specific ways. There are a lot of opportunities here. Thanks a lot for your time.